Hey guys, Phantasy here. For today, we're talking about a new 9-star weapon series that just got added to NGS called the Melek Weapons. These are available for all weapon types within the game, and they're a higher version of something that's already existed in the past called the Relic Weapon series. These used to be a rare weapon when Retem first came out, but now they're pretty common within Urgent Quest. But with these Meleks, they are way above and beyond those, but they do share a lot of similarities. First off, something minor but the most obvious is that it's the same exact appearance between the two series. So the Melek katana here looks like this, and it's the exact same for the Relic katana. So if you like the looks of the Reliks before, then there's a positive for you, but you could also see it as lazy design if you wanted to actually have a different looking weapon. For the potentials, they are pretty much the same too. With the Relic series, there was 4 different potentials that you could get. For the katana, there's the explosive unit. So this is the exact same between the two, except for the Relic at level 6 technically has higher potency than the Melek version. This one gets up to 27% potency and then causes area damage when you hit an enemy every 10 seconds. The second part is the exact same with the Relic series, but the potency gets up to, at level 6, 35%. So it's actually higher there, but that's because it's an older series, which is a way lower rarity. So it's a catch-up mechanic. But with the attack stats that the Relic can get up to, it's only 737, while the Melek can get up to 990. So because the attack is so high, that is why the potency is tweaked on this in comparison to the previous version of this series. But let's take a look at the other potentials. For Sword, as an example, there's a Vigorous unit. It can get up to 34% potency, has 20% damage resistance, and Rest Assign HP recovery plus 25%. There's a 10-second delay to equipment effects. I believe that is talking about the Rest Assign HP recovery. So when you first equip the weapon, it's going to take 10 seconds to start getting that effect indefinitely. Next, we have the Harmonious unit. This has a 16% potency, which is kind of low, but it has a critical hit rate of plus 15% and an additional 15 when your HP is 50% or higher. You should always be above that amount. There's no reason to be below that HP, and it's pretty easy considering how much rest assign the game gives you. Then for the last one, there is the Imbued unit. This gives 34% potency, PP consumption minus 15%, and PP recovery plus 30% when attacking. So it's very nice for upkeeping your photon power. These 4 potentials are spread throughout the weapon types of the Melek weapons. So like Sword, Wire, Spear, and Soaring Blades gets that Vigorous unit. For the explosive one, it's Daggers, Double Saber, Knuckles, and Katana. All of the ranged weapons get that Harmonious unit, and then all the technique weapons get that Imbued unit. But you can take these potentials and put it on the other weapons through multi-weaponing. It's actually the exact same as what you could do with the Relic weapon series, so if you've done it with those, you'll be familiar. But basically, as we saw here, the katana has that explosive unit, and if I put it on a sword, for example, through multi-weaponing, I would actually get the Vigorous unit through the sword to benefit the katana's attacks instead of the explosive unit. I could also do it the same the other way around, so if I had a Melek sword, I could put a sword onto this as a material weapon through this multi-weapon system, and then the sword will be able to do the explosive unit ability. So through this, you do get options for your potential, but because of this, you may need to get a second weapon to get the potential that you would prefer. Honestly, I think the better way for SEGA to do this, if they were to actually do this in the future, is whenever you unlock a potential for a new weapon series, if there would be options, just let us select when we unlock potential instead of it being on different weapon types within a series. Before we move on here into how we obtain the Melek weapons, is there any interaction between the Melek weapons and the old Reliks? Like, can you do multi-weaponing with these? Or can you even use the Fixa systems to transfer Fixas or enhance them? Well, unfortunately, no. When we check the item lab to do these things, multi-weapon, if I go to Melek here, try to get, this Relic Barbados to multi-weapon into, it just does not work. And if we check the other weapons, you can see that it's showing up there. So unfortunately, no with multi-weaponing, and it's the same for the preset skills. I can't use the enhancement system to get the Relic Fixa off of this, but I could with a regular relic to relic. Now let's talk about how we obtain these Melek weapons, and then afterwards even compare it to other weapon series in the game to see how it stacks up. So to obtain these, there's only one area you can get it from right now, and that is the Roof Maquad area right here by killing dread enemies in that location. So the level 82 ones, the Zva Curio and the Zvati Scythe, and then also the new boss enemy that shows up on a little arena-like island, the Halvati Vera. This boss is based off the Dual Quest Phase 2 version of it. However, it has a different moveset and is meant for up to 32 players that can be in this Roof Maquad area. The way that you get this thing to spawn is by killing the aforementioned dread enemies in this Roof Maquad area, as long as they are marked by the dread enemy symbol surrounded by these little red crystals. These dreads and the Halvati can both drop the Melek weapons. However, it does seem like it's skewed towards the Halvati, because the only two that I've gotten to drop so far have been from that boss and not the dread enemies. I can't say for certain though, as I only farmed this area for about 6 hours as of now, but they also can drop these dread scales that you can exchange for Melek weapons too. You typically get 2 scales from any of these that you kill, but it can also just give you 1 or even up to 3. You go to any item trader in the city though to exchange these dread scales with the bottom option here, and for any of the different weapons it takes 150 of these dread scales. So you would see about 75 kills to equal 1 weapon. It took me about 6 hours to get enough scales for a weapon, but I was distracted by Twitch chat as well as UQs popping up here and there, so it may take less for you if you just keep on going at it. But these are limited per day on how many you can grab of these weapons. You can grab up to 2 of each of these. There's no way that you'd be able to clear the shop in a single day, but it does limit you for a specific weapon if you wanted to keep getting like knuckles or katanas over and over again, if you wanted to like sell them in the player market because these are sellable, or even use them for the Fixa enhancement system. Another unfortunate part about it, speaking of Fixas, is that there's no options to get like a Fixa 1 from these, like the Verschmells with the Termina 1. The only option is getting a blank weapon. There's also no other options for items in here, like Arms Refiner 2s or armor pieces. It's just these weapons. That's all you can use these dread scales for right now. So if you're not looking to use these weapons, I would just still use the dread scales to sell to other players, because they're currently selling for at least like a few mil for a single weapon. But I am sure that these will drop over time. If you are looking to do this for Meseta, with the efficiency of this farm, it may be best to ignore Halvati Vera completely. The reason why I say that is that it's way tankier and gives the same amount of dread scales as the regular dread enemies. The only difference between the dreads and the Halvati for drops is that it has a very small chance of giving the 10-star Flugelguard series. So if you end up getting that somehow, then you could make a lot of Meseta. But I think it's best for consistency to just kill the dread enemies and the recon gigants that spawn in this Roof Maquad area. With that aside, let's finally compare the Melek Weapon series to others within the game. Here we have a damage calculator made by Cakewalk, and it's actually a new version 3 that they made recently. It has a ton of different stats from different skills within classes, as well as the add-on skills and more beyond that. But for this, it's going to be basically like min-maxing, so all the add-on skills are at level 20, and all of the class skills that matter are going to be maxed out as well with skill points, and it's basically just going to be looking at that instead of a whole bunch of different instances. There will be some different scenarios that I'll look at, but I definitely can't look at all of them. For this one here, we're using the Melek crit potential as the baseline, or that harmonious unit, and then we have the best in slot augments that you can get right now. The Gladius Soul, Hal Finale, Gigas Maste, Grand Dreadkeeper, XD Def Parfait, and High Red Domina. And this applies to all the armors, which are auto armors, which have the highest potency that you can get right now. This will be against level 80 enemies that are in the game. It'll be at first bossing focused. This gear will be at its current maximum of plus 70, and the weapon potentials will be at level 6. For the classes right now, we'll be maining Braver, and then the subclass will be Slayer. For Verschmells, it's a little bit different since it doesn't take any benefit from crit rate or from floor potency. So they're using these augments right here, which also apply to the units for just this particular weapon. And then also we can do a class replacement for Verschmelz since it doesn't benefit from Slayer, so it will be using Bouncer for a subclass instead. With that established, let's take a look at these different comparisons. So as I said before, the baseline is the Melek crit potential or the harmonious unit. And anything that's in green here is better than that instance. So at a no Fixa, all of the other Meleks are better by like 1.5 to 2%. The Tasa weapons are better, so like 3% for the incandescent potential. Then for the Flexel, it's like 4%, 5% around there. And then Flugguard, of course, is better at like 8 to 13%, depending on how many boosts you have going there. But the contention is actually with Verschmelz and Neos Astrian for most people. So with Verschmelz, Termina 1 is like 2.5% worse when compared to a Melek weapon, at least when you're using Slayer sub versus the Bouncer sub with Verschmelz. If I use a Bouncer sub for the Melek as well, then it gets a little bit closer, like 1.6% worse than the Melek crit potential. But once you get into Termina 2, it is better than this Melek. Going back to Slayer sub, though, it's basically on par with the Termina 2 for this potential. Basically, if you want Verschmelz to beat out any of these Meleks, if they're at their no Fixa versions, it needs to be a Termina 3 at least. Looking at Neos Astrian, it basically just gets beaten out no matter where it's at with a no Fixa here with Melek. Like it's minus 5% with no Fixa Astrian. If you get even like a attack 5, it's getting beaten out there. Fatale 4 and Fatale 5 are basically on par, a little bit better. It isn't until you get to the new Fixas that you may get in Darkfall Solus, like Abandac and Fixa Wix, Fixa Unwix, that it starts to be better than a no Fixa Melek. For the Unwix, here it has like 20% non-weak attacks because you don't really want to hit a non-weak attack on bosses. So if we do switch this to mobbing, it will favor the Unwix here, and you'll see bigger percentages here because it's a higher percentage of non-weak attacks. So basically, if you're using these in their situations, it's going to be much better than a no Fixa Melek for the Neos Astrian. For the rest of the weapons, they're pretty much the same way, where they're like all negative, except for maybe like a few Fixas that are high up there, or if they're like in their situations, like the Neos Justitian against light weak enemies, and it'll be like slightly better than the lowest Melek here. But for the most part, the Melek is just a very good weapon that is only eclipsed by Tasa and Flugguard in pretty much every instance. Out of these Meleks, though, how do they stack up against each other? Which potential is the best to use for DPS? Well, when comparing the no Fixas, the Melek AoE or the explosive unit is the best to use. The reason for this, even though it has a lower potency than the Vigorous and the Imbued unit, is because of that explosion that can happen every 10 seconds. So if you do proc that when attacking, every time that it is available, then that extra damage or that extra attack makes up for that loss of potency to actually give you more DPS in this situation. You can think of it as an extra PA that happens automatically while you're doing other things. And it's a 200 potency attack. So it's similar to PAs like Silverleaf Storm here or Radiant Lilac. So you're going to see similar damage come out of it because it does scale with your potency percentage off of your gear. I wouldn't recommend this for all weapons though, because it's an explosion that is centered around your character and not where you are attacking. So like for ranged weapons, for instance, if you're shooting from afar, you're not going to hit anything with this explosion because it's just around you and not your bullets. Now though, let's take the Fixas into consideration. Which weapon will be the best if it has like a high Fixa, or if we just keep going along these different levels? Well, it actually turns out that the crit one ends up being the best. Let's take a look at Termina 5, which it will pretty much take the most use of out of these different weapons. And as you can see, basically all of the other Meleks are in the red for every other instance of Fixa. The only times that these change is when you consider the other Fixas. For Fixa Wix, in its scenario, none of it is better than this Termina 5 crit, so we can take that out. For Unwix, in like mobbing situations, you could consider like some of these to be better for that situation, but I wouldn't really use Meleks for mobbing anyways. So I wouldn't really look to get an Unwix. I'd prefer to have like Termina, which is usable for both bosses and for mobbing. For Abandac, I actually made a separate sheet. So with this, pretty much everything else is the same with the classes and the upgrades and whatnot. The only thing that's different is all of the augments on my gear. So on this first piece, it's exactly the same as the previous sheet, but then things start changing because of how Abandac works. So like I have Gladius Soul S, Half an Ally S, Biggest Maste S, Spirit Trippable, XD Death Melra, and High Ale Domina. So completely different from the weapon here to get differently named augments to benefit more from the Abandac. Because the more differently named augments I have, the more potency I get from this Fixa. So I do some other changes to augments as well, like add some LCs in, which actually is still beneficial because I end up getting more potency out of the Abandac than what I would lose by sticking with like the regular versions of these. I switch the Gua Trippable, XD Dot Ra Tech, High Ale Domina S, and then for the last one, I have Star Trippable and XD Spit Parfait to have different kinds of augments to get up to the max of 20 different ones. This is the best setup of Abandac that I've found so far. There might be something that's slightly better or will change in the future, but for the baseline, we'll have an Abandac 5 for the crit potential. And we'll see if any of the other potentials beat this out with high fixes against it. So we'll take a look over here as we see 20 unique augments. So we got the maximum amount. And as we see with the baseline, none of the other Meleks are better with the high fixes either. They are pretty close, like 0.34%, 0.6% at Abandac 5 as well with the same build. But between the Termina 5 and the Abandac 5 builds that we just did with these two, which one is better? Well, we can actually compare them with a different calculator within the sheet, this quick gear and augment replacement calculator, where basically the left side here is the Abandac build, and the right side is the Termina 5 build, where we have the fixes changed right here, but the weapons stay the same. And as we can see on the calculations shown here, the Abandac is slightly better, because this one is the Abandac 3552, and then the Termina 5 build is 3514. It's about a 1% difference. So the best of the best Melek weapon that you can get is the crit potential with a Abandac 5 as long as you are using the correct build. But of course, this is just a dream scenario. You're very unlikely to get any Fixa that high, at least this soon. But what would you realistically go for? I think going for like any kind of Termina would probably be best for the crit potential. But if you're going for like the other potentials, like having a Fixa on those, then like the Fixa Abandac, just pretty much any level above Abandac 2 is like really good. You can get a Fixa Wix, which is also nice. But Fixa Fatale can also keep up with the other potentials too. I wouldn't use Fatale probably on this potential since it already has so much crit rate, but it does benefit the others more. The problem is we don't have agency over which Fixas we get unless if we buy them off of somebody else. But if you do get a Fixa, it's pretty much going to be better than a no Fixa Melek of any kind of potential. Like if you just get a Fixa 1 of something, even Fatale for the crit one, it's going to be better than a no Fixa of the others. So just keep that in mind. But comparing the realistic Fixas to like the Sa or the Flugelguard, a Fixa level 2 in most cases or a 3 is going to be out a no Fixa to Sa here. So like the 3%, 4%, 5%, you're seeing similar numbers for those across the board with the Meleks. For Flugelguard, though, it's going to be a little bit harder to overcome because like 8% without the Photon Blast effect going, and then with the effect, it's like 10%. So how do we get past that? Well, with the Melek, not really with the regular build. Like it goes up to 9% here with the Termina 5 Melek crit potential, so that beats out like it without the Photon Blast effect going. But other than that, you're gonna have a hard time unless if you use an Abandac build instead. So using this quick gear calculator again, we have the Flugelguard with a no fix with the build from the previous chart versus the Abandac build, the Abandac 5. And with this, the Flugelguard without the Photon Blast effect that it can get it'll actually be 2% worse. But if we give it its effect, then it's only a little bit worse than a Abandac 5 Melek. In all honesty, though, I think you'll have an easier time finding a Guard with no Fixa than you would this Miracle Melek weapon. Let's move on into how Slayer mains would actually handle these Meleks, because it would be different. So here we have the regular builds, but for the classes, we have Slayer as a main, and then Bouncer as a subclass. So that means with the Melek crit potential, it actually loses favor with Slayer, because Slayer gets all of that crit rate from its class skills, and the other weapons will benefit more since they don't have any natural crit rates. So you see that with the 2.52%, the 2.28% difference instead of what was before with like the 1.81 and 1.57. But comparing this to like other weapons, for Schmelz, you just definitely don't want to use as a Slayer because 100% crit rate with for Schmelz and having more crit rate beyond 100% doesn't do anything for you. So you just lose out a lot there. So this is not worth using at all. With the rest of the weapons, it's the same deal as with the other sheet, where high Fixa Astrian can beat out some of the Meleks, like Fixa Wix and Abandac are going to do the best against a no Fixa Melek, but Tasa and Guard are still going to outright beat these. You'll still need like a Fixa 2 or 3 to really compete with the Tasa, and a very high Fixa to compete with Guard. And funnily enough, with the Meleks, the best one for a regular build is still the Termina 5 crit potential. And with the extra crit rate from Slayer compounded with the crit rate on this Melek weapon, because of this extra crit damage, it actually beats out a Guard even with its Photon Blast extra effect. So that is unlike the previous sheet, which couldn't really do that. It could only beat out with the Guard not doing its Photon Blast effect. So how does the Abandac on Slayer stack up? Doing the same thing as before, where we have the Abandac 5 and Termina 5 with all the different replacements, but this time having Slayer and Bouncer as the classes. It's actually not much of a difference here as we saw before. 3818.52 with the Abandac, and then 3810 with the Termina 5. So technically the Abandac is still better, but it's basically no difference. So that means on Slayer, a Abandac 5 or Termina 5 is basically the same two, so it's probably easier to get the Termina 5 if you had the option, because building that with all the different augments is easier since you only need 6 different types versus trying to get all of these S's and LC's and all these different kinds of XD's that you would on an Abandac build. Now that we've done all of those damage calculations, where does Melek really fall? I think the Melek weapons are the new standard weapon to go for, just like how Verschmelz just was, and how Astrian was before that. So basically, it's like the new guarantee that new players can go for. But if you've already gotten an Astrian or a Verschmelz upgraded with like a decent enough Fixa or something like that, then I wouldn't really bother with the Melek series because it's just that close. The only time that I would consider moving on from Versh or Astrian to Melek is if I somehow got a high Fixa of this series to drop for me. Other than that, I would just ignore this and skip to Sa or Guard, most likely that, if it ever becomes more obtainable or cheaper, or if there's alternative 10 stars in the future, which will most likely happen. I just don't know how soon. Honestly, I think the best thing that comes from this is that finally Slayer mains can get a guaranteed 9-star that is useful to them. Like, Verschmelz, Termina 1, just basically worse than everything else in the game that they could possibly use. Even like some of the older weapons, like 5 stars or 4 stars, were better than using a Verschmelz, even at level 80 enemies, which is absolutely ridiculous. That is everything that I have on these Melek weapons today. I do gotta say one more thing though. In a couple weeks on the 6th, I think some things will be changing. There's this new level skip AC item that will be introduced, but that doesn't, who cares about that? But with this, they kind of tease that plus 80 is going to be happening, so upgrading gear to plus 80, so that's going to change some stats around. May give us a new slot, like slot 7 for augmenting. That will definitely change things, but I don't necessarily think that's the case if these pieces only come with 6 augments on them. but we'll just have to see when that update comes out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this though. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.